My father tried to marry me off to the man who assaulted me and said the guy was honorable for taking responsibility. I chose justice and never looked back. My father was the kind of man who cared more about what the neighbors thought than what happened inside his own house. He wore pressed shirts to church every Sunday morning. He made sure our family looked perfect from the outside. Mowed lawn, polished car in the driveway, smiling photo on the church directory. My name is Lena. I was 19 when everything fell apart. I was home from my first year of college for the summer, living back in my old bedroom, waiting tables a few nights a week to save up money for the fall. My father's business partner had a son named Wade. Wade was 26, worked at his father's car dealership, and had been around our family since I was in middle school. My father loved Wade. He talked about him at dinner like he was the son he never had. Wade was polite in front of adults and completely different when they weren't around. He cornered me at a 4th of July gathering at our house. Everyone else was in the backyard watching fireworks. I had stepped inside to use the bathroom and he followed me. I fought him. He was bigger. When it was over, I locked myself in the bathroom for 2 hours, sitting on the tile floor listening to the booms outside, my own breathing the loudest thing in my ears. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table and told my father exactly what Wade did. I told him where it happened. I told him I had locked myself in the bathroom for 2 hours. I said I wanted to go to the police. My father put his coffee down and said we are not doing that. He said Wade's father was his business partner. He said their families had been connected for 15 years. He said going to the police would ruin both families and nobody would win. I told him I didn't care about winning. I told him his business partner's son assaulted me in our own house. He said he would talk to Wade's father. He said they would handle it privately. I said there is nothing to handle privately. A crime happened. He held up his hand and said, Lena, I will take care of this. He said people talk, and once something like this gets out, it follows a girl forever. He said he was protecting me. 3 days later, Wade's father was at our kitchen table. A man named Holt. Holt sat across from me with his hands folded on the wood and said he was sorry about what happened, and that Wade was also sorry, and that the best thing for everyone, the cleanest path forward for both families, would be if Wade and I started seeing each other. He said Wade wanted to make things right. He said marriage was on the table. He said his wife had already mentioned it to people at church and everyone thought it was a beautiful idea. He said they would pay for the wedding. He said they would help us get a starter home. I looked at my father. My father nodded. He nodded. My father, who drove me to school for 12 years, who walked me to my dorm room and told me to call if I ever needed anything, sat across from me and nodded at the idea of me marrying the man who assaulted me in his own home. I asked my father if he had lost his mind. He told me to lower my voice. He said Holt was being more than reasonable. He said most families wouldn't offer this. He said Wade came from a good family and had a stable job, and that in a few years I wouldn't even think about that night anymore. He called it that night, not what it was. That night. Holt said maybe what happened was a misunderstanding that got out of hand. My father didn't correct him. Holt said a wedding would bring the families closer together and protect everyone's reputation. They shook hands at my kitchen table. They shook hands over my body and my future like they were closing a deal on a truck. The next day, my father told me Holt's wife wanted to take me dress shopping. I said I wasn't going. He said I was being difficult. He said Wade felt terrible and was willing to step up and that I should be grateful someone was offering to take responsibility. Grateful. He used that word. He said most men would have denied it. He said Wade was being honorable. He called the man who assaulted his daughter honorable because he agreed to marry her afterward. 2 days later, I drove to the police station alone. I gave my statement. I gave them the date, the time, the location, and the name. The officer asked if my family knew I was there. I said my family is the reason I'm here alone. Wade was arrested the next morning at the dealership in front of 3 customers and his father. Holt called my father before Wade made it to the station. My father called me 6 times that day. I answered on the 6th. He said I had destroyed everything. He said Holt pulled out of their business partnership. He said the church community was talking. He said I had ruined our family's name over something that could have been resolved quietly. I said his business partner's son committed a crime. He said I made a choice I couldn't take back. I said so did Wade. That week I changed my number and moved out of the house while he was at work. I took what fit in my car and drove to my college town a month early. I found a room to rent and got a part-time job at a restaurant near campus. My father thought silence and pressure would make me fold. He didn't know I'd already stopped being the daughter who waited for his permission. There was a guy I worked with named Kennethson. He noticed I was jumpy. He noticed when I checked my phone 3 times in 10 minutes or flinched when the front door opened during a rush. He didn't push. He didn't give me weird looks. He just kept doing his job and being normal around me, which honestly meant more than he probably knew. One night after a closing shift in a dark parking lot, he said if I needed someone to walk me to my car, he was there. No follow-up questions, no catch. Just a simple offer from someone who noticed I was scared and wanted to help without asking for anything back. I almost cried right there in the parking lot. We started talking after shifts. Nothing deep at first, just normal stuff. Classes, music, whether the manager was ever going to fix the broken ice machine. After about a week of that, I told him everything on a curb outside the restaurant. He listened without interrupting once. When I finished, he said, "That's not a family decision. That's a crime. You did the right thing." Something loosened in my chest. For the first time in weeks, I started sleeping through the night again. I thought maybe I'd carved out a place where none of them could reach me. Then Amy Claire showed up. It was a Tuesday lunch shift. She walked through the front door dressed for Sunday service, hair done, smile on, and scanned the room. Then her eyes found me. She walked straight across the floor to my counter and said, "There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you. Your father gave me your work address." My hands stopped moving. Dythe, the man who told me he was protecting me, had handed my location to the mother of the man who assaulted me. Amy Claire sat down at the counter like we were getting coffee and said Wade was a wreck. He couldn't eat or sleep. His lawyer said this could follow him for the rest of his life. She said, "You were like family to us, Lena. Is this really what you want?" I could feel the customers nearby. I could feel my coworkers behind me. I told her calmly that she needed to leave. She didn't move. She leaned in and whispered, "Your father agrees with me. He said if you drop this, he'll pay for the rest of your college. Think about that. College tuition." That was what my pain was worth to them. A check and a handshake and everyone moves on like nothing happened. I looked Amy Claire in the face and said, "Get out of my restaurant." She picked up her bag, smoothed her blouse, and walked out without another word. Kennethson came up behind me a few minutes later and asked who that was. I said I'd explain later, but I already knew what Amy Claire's visit meant. stopped. The safety I'd built had a crack in it now. My father made sure of that. I called the officer the next morning and told him everything. He told me to document everything, every word, every visit. Kennethson helped me type it up that same day while it was still fresh. A few days later, my landlord called. He was an older guy, quiet, kept to himself. So when he called me out of nowhere, I knew something was off. He said a man had come by asking about me, said he was my father and was concerned, wanted to know if I lived alone, if I'd had visitors. He said he didn't tell him anything, but thought I should know. I thanked him and hung up. Dythy was tracking me like I was something he lost and needed to recover. So I called him. When he answered, I said, "Stop sending people to find me. Stop giving out my address. Stop showing up where I live." He said, "You're my daughter. I have every right to know where you are." I said, "You lost that right when you shook hands with the father of the man who hurt me." There was a long pause. Then his voice came back, harder than before. He said, "You're going to regret this, Lena. When this is over and you have nothing, you're going to wish you listened to me." I hung up. His words sat in my head for the rest of the day like a rock I couldn't move. Kennethson kept me steady, but he was a college kid at a restaurant. He couldn't stop my father from showing up at my door. I needed more. I walked into student services on campus, and a counselor pointed me to a survivor support group at a community center nearby. The first meeting, I mostly listened. There were about 8 people in the room, all different ages. Some talked about what happened to them. Some just talked about the after, the part nobody warns you about, where the people who are supposed to love you become the ones you have to fight. That part hit me hardest. After the meeting, a woman came up to me in the parking lot. She was a few years older than me, calm voice, short hair. Her name was April. We went for coffee and she told me about her own family. The same playbook. Guilt first, then money, then silence, then showing up uninvited. She said the only thing that stops them is the case going forward. Don't give them an inch. She said it like someone who had walked through fire with a map. April became my second ally. About a week later, I found a plain white envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a printed copy of something Dythy had posted on the community board at our church. It read, "Please pray for our family during this difficult time. Our daughter has made choices that have caused great pain to those around her. We ask for understanding and privacy." I read it 3 times. No mention of Wade, no mention of the assault, no mention of the arrest or the kitchen table meeting where he shook hands over my future. He framed me as the problem to the entire congregation. Every person who walked into that church and past that board would read those words and fill in the blanks with whatever story made my father look like the victim. Someone at that church had been decent enough to print it and mail it to me. I called April. She said, "Save it. Everything like this helps your case. He's building your evidence for you." I put it in a folder on my desk next to the document about Amy Claire. 2 pieces of paper, 2 pieces of proof. My father and Wade's family kept handing me evidence and didn't even know it. 1 week before the preliminary hearing, there was a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole and my stomach went tight. It was Dythy. His eyes were red, tired red, not angry red. His shoulders were pulled in like he was trying to make himself smaller. He looked like a man who had run out of moves. I almost didn't open it, but something about how he looked made me stop, and I opened the door. He sat on my couch with his elbows on his knees and his head hanging low and didn't speak for a full minute. I counted in my head. Then he lifted his head and said, "I haven't slept in 3 weeks. The business is falling apart. Your mother's family won't return my calls. I know you're angry, Lena. I know I handled this wrong. My heart did something I didn't give it permission to do. It softened, just for a breath." Those were the closest words to an apology I had ever heard from my father. I thought he was finally going to say the thing I had been waiting for since that morning at the kitchen table. "I'm sorry for what happened to you. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I believe you." He took a breath that sounded like it cost him something. Then he said, "But I need you to understand what this is doing to me. I'm losing everything. If you drop the case, I can fix things with Holt. We can put the business back together. I'll pay for your school. I'll help you move somewhere new. We can start fresh." He was crying, tears running down his face, voice cracking, hands gripping his knees, and every single word was about him. Not once did he say Wade's name and the word wrong in the same sentence. Not once did he acknowledge that his daughter was assaulted in his own home by a man he praised at his own dinner table. I said, "Dad, do you even know what you're asking me?" He wiped his face and said, "I'm asking you to save this family." I looked at him. I really looked at him. I said, "This family ended the night you shook Holt's hand at our kitchen table." Something changed in his face. It was like watching a mask come off and another one slide on underneath it. The sadness drained. The tears stopped. His jaw tightened, and the man on my couch wasn't a broken father anymore. He was the same man who told me to lower my voice. He stood up slowly and said, "Fine, but when Wade's lawyer puts you on that stand and tears you apart, don't call me. You made your choice." He shut the door behind him like he was leaving a business meeting that didn't go his way. I sat against that door for a long time. The apartment was quiet. The clock kept ticking. I could still smell his cologne in the room, that same one he'd worn to church every Sunday for as long as I could remember. He came to my apartment. He cried. He looked broken. And for 30 seconds, I thought my father was going to be my father again. But he wasn't. Every tear was for himself. Every word was about what he needed. I called Kennethson at 2 in the morning and told him what happened. He said, "He came to cry so you'd feel guilty enough to protect him. That's not love, Lena. That's control." The night before the hearing, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "You should know that Wade is going to say you were drinking that night and that you came onto him first. His lawyer has been coaching him." I stared at those words for a long time. Drinking. Came onto him. That was their plan. I was 19 years old, and I'd had a glass of lemonade at my own family's house, and they were going to stand in front of a judge and say I asked for it. I called April. She said someone on their side just broke ranks. Save the message, screenshot it, show it to the officer first thing tomorrow. I called Kennethson. He said, "They're going to try to make you the villain. You know that, right?" I said I knew. That was what my father had been doing since the beginning. Kennethson said, "Then walk in there tomorrow and tell the truth so clearly nobody can twist it." I slept through the night for the first time in weeks. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Just a plain room with rows of benches and fluorescent lights, and a judge's bench at the front. Wade sat at the defense table in a pressed button-down, scrubbed and clean-shaven, hair combed, looking like he'd stepped out of a church directory photo. Holt and Amy Claire were in the first row behind him, and then I saw him, Dythy. My father was sitting in the back row, on Wade's side. He didn't sit in the middle. He didn't sit on my side. He didn't even sit in the hallway to avoid choosing. He chose. clothes. He walked into that courtroom and sat down behind the family of the man who assaulted his daughter. I looked right at him. He looked down at his hands, then turned his head slightly toward the wall. He couldn't even look at me. April and Kennethson were in the second row behind me. I could feel them there. Wade's lawyer went first. Smooth voice, buttoned jacket. He called Wade a dedicated worker, a church-going young man, a family friend of over a decade. He said Wade and I had been friendly for months, that there had been a mutual connection. He used the word flirtatious. He said the events of the 4th of July were a misunderstanding that occurred after alcohol was involved. He said, "My client deeply regrets any confusion that occurred that evening." Confusion. That was the word he chose. Like Wade accidentally bumped into me in a hallway. I gripped the edge of my chair so hard my knuckles ached. Behind me, I felt April's hand pressed gently against the back of my bench, steady and still. It was enough. When it was my turn, I stood up and walked to the stand. My legs were solid. My hands weren't shaking. I sat down and adjusted the microphone slightly and looked at the room. I didn't rush. I stated the date, July 4th, the time, between 9 and 9:30 in the evening, the location, my family's home, the hallway near the back of the house, while everyone else was outside watching fireworks. I used plain words, short sentences. I didn't dress it up and I didn't water it down. I said Wade followed me inside when I went to use the bathroom. I said he cornered me. I said I told him to stop. I said I fought back. I said he was bigger than me. I said when it was over, I locked myself in the bathroom for 2 hours. The room went heavy quiet, the kind where nobody breathes too loud. Then I kept going. I described telling my father the next morning, his reaction, the meeting 3 days later with Holt at the same kitchen table, the marriage proposal, my father nodding. I said it clearly. I said he sat across from me and nodded in agreement with the father of the man who had just assaulted me. I saw Dythy shift in the back row. A woman sitting next to him, someone I had never seen before, leaned away from him slightly. Not a big movement, just an inch or two, but enough. Wade's lawyer stood up to cross-examine me. He asked if I had been drinking. I said, I had 1 glass of lemonade. I was 19. He paused like he was waiting for me to add something. I didn't. He asked why I waited 3 days to go to the police. He asked it like it was the question that would unravel me. I looked past him at the judge and said, because my father told me not to. Because he brought Wade's father to our kitchen table and told me to marry the man who assaulted me. That's why I waited. Not because I wasn't sure. Because the people who were supposed to protect me were protecting him instead. The lawyer straightened his jacket, said nothing, and sat down. I was asked if I had anything else to add. I said yes. I picked up my folder and opened it. I read about Amy Claire walking into my workplace and offering to pay the rest of my college if I dropped the case. I read about Dythy giving my work address to Wade's family. I read the church post that called my choices a great pain without once mentioning what Wade did. I read about the anonymous text warning that Wade was being coached to lie. The judge listened without saying a word. I glanced up once. Holt's face had gone completely still, like someone had pulled a plug behind his eyes. Amy Claire had her hand pressed over her mouth. Dythy was staring at the floor between his feet, his shoulders pulled in, his head low. He wasn't looking at anyone. He was just sitting there in the back row of a courtroom, on the wrong side, staring at the ground while his daughter read out loud every single thing he did to try to make her disappear. I closed the folder and looked at the judge. I said, I was 19 years old, and every adult in my life told me to be quiet. My father called the man who assaulted me honorable because he offered to marry me. I'm here because I decided that my life is not a deal to be made at a kitchen table.